Like I said, when they blew the vault door up in 1960, we had a constable that lived here in the community. He would come and spend the night, sleep in the bank. The next morning when Mr. Howard would come to open up the bank, he would go home. But until they got the new door put in, he stayed here every night in the bank. The firefighters at that time, there was no water except out of the creek. They had a very difficult time trying to preserve and save the bank building and the post office, the old post office building. Mr. Howard was very reluctant to allow them to come inside the building, but finally he let the sheriff of Cannon County, Mr. Robert Bogle, stand in the front door, and he promised him that he would make sure that nobody took anything out of the bank.
Welcome to another edition of Community Insight. Join us as we travel Middle Tennessee, uncovering history and experiencing the adventure of unique stories and events coming to you inside your community.
Hi, I'm Gary Hancock, and today you're in Gassaway, Tennessee. We're at the Melton's Bank and the Gassaway Post Office. Post office is no longer in service, and neither is the bank. But we have it today as a part of history, and we've turned it into a museum area of the Gassaway community. My wife, Jama, and I bought the building in 2018 and started repairs on it. And we had our grand opening in 2019. If you'd like to contact us for a tour, my phone number is 615-464-7997, or my email address is gjem@dtccom.net. I'm going to give you a little brief history of just a few of the points about our Gassaway Museum in the Melton's Bank. If you'll follow around with me. This is a map that was given to the post office in 1925. The building that we're in was moved and occupied starting in January of 1925. The Melton's Bank existed and continued to serve the people in this area continually, never stopping until 1986, when the last Mr. Howard Kidwell passed away. The map was given to the post office in 1925 when they began operations here after moving from the Melton's Mercantile Store. And it continued in operation until 1973 when the post office in Gassaway was merged with the post office in Liberty. The bank has been robbed 2 times in its existence. One time was in 1933. They got $2,300. This is a picture of Mr. Jim Kidwell and his son, Howard Kidwell. This was made in about 1949. Mr. Jim passed away in 1950, but Mr. Howard lived on and continued to run the bank until 1986. But in 1933, 2 men came in the bank. One stayed outside in a car and robbed the bank of $2,300. Mr. Jim shot at them when they went across the bridge leaving Gassaway. The other time that it got robbed was in 1960 on a Saturday night. They broke through a window on the side of the bank. They came in, nobody of course in the bank at night. At that time the vault door was wood structure, just 4x4 oak timbers. They took dynamite and blew the door open. When they done that, there was 2 cash drawers for the 2 cash windows, in which there was $300 cash in each drawer, as they would start each day with. So they took the $600 cash. They also took a little metal box that had war bonds and savings bonds in it. The next morning, the Wilson County Sheriff Department found that metal box in a ditch at Shop Springs. They brought it back. Mr. Howard verified that it was the box from the Melton's bank. It still had the war bonds and savings bonds inside. So they got those back, but they never got the $600 back. Also back through here, this is a home switchboard from the little home telephone company. These are the people that ran it. Mr. Sammy George and his wife, Jenny Tate George. They ran this out of their home, as it was the home telephone company. And it remained in operation until 1958 when DeKalb Telephone Cooperative bought the little home telephone companies out. Here's a pictorial picture of Gassaway about 1920. See how clear the hillsides are. Farming was their main purpose in that period of time in this area. There was 2 grist mills, 5 sawmills, a hat shop, shoe shop, and a little mattress company that operated in Gassaway, along with 4 mercantile stores as well. This was what they called the warehouse, where they would make the wheels and the spokes. They also sold wire, barbed wire, fencing wire, and things of that nature at the warehouse. This picture here of Mr. John Melton's house. He lived next door to the Melton's mercantile store, which has been next door to the bank and the post office. It was the first house that had electricity in Gassaway, and the way that he had a separate building, and he had a kerosene generator in it. We'll take a quick trip into the vault. Like I said, when they blew the vault door up in 1960, we had a constable that lived here in the community. He would come and spend the night, sleep in the bank. And the next morning when Mr. Howard would come to open up the bank, he would go home. But until they got the new door put in, he stayed here every night in the bank. The bank is all hand-poured concrete. You can see where it's been formed up. There was no concrete trucks back in that period of time, and so it's all hand-poured. There was a limited amount of steel, and so next door to the bank was a blacksmith shop, and they used discarded horseshoes to reinforce the concrete. It has been told, I have no documents to prove it, but told that once they tried to get into the bank by an old hammer drill, and they hit one of the horseshoes and couldn't get in, and the bank everything was safe. But this is the interior of the bank. This is the metal box that was taken in 1960 that had the war bonds and the savings bonds in it, and it still remains today in the bank. Above the vault here, I found the straight chair, and then nails drove in the rafters, and then the wire strung on the nails. Every year from 1925 through 1976 is where they put their archive records. I brought down 1929 to show the people because the bank never closed during the Depression. It was one of the few banks in the state that didn't close, and to my knowledge, the only bank in the county that did not close during the Depression. These are several of the checks from 1918, 1919. Again, you can tell, but there is no routing number or no account numbers that were on the bank checks back then. And they also many times used pencil to write the checks. This is the item that I've not been able to get back, the old cannonball safe. When they broke into the bank in 1960, they tried to get into the cannonball safe. They couldn't get into it, and it was too heavy, so they couldn't remove it. So it remained. I do not know where that was. I know that it was here in 1987 when First National Bank out of Manchester bought the charter. This is all the journal entries that's been preserved over the years. You can see they're not in real good condition, but They have been preserved, again, from 1903 until 1986. We've had people that have come and found where their grandparents' transactions was made, and they've made pictures of them. I've got a few here that you can see how detailed the handwriting is. And I believe this one here is, again, from 1919, over 100 years old, and how legible that it still is. This is one of the wheels from a steam engine that run one of the grist mills. Mr. Jim Kidwell persuaded the farmers here for them to not sell their livestock to other farmers. So what they would do, they would gather them in a holding area and then walk them all the way to Brush Creek, which is over in the edge of Smith County, load them on the train and take them to the Nashville livestock market and sell them there. He also persuaded them, don't bring your money back to Gassaway, buy things in Nashville that we cannot make or do not have here in Gassaway. So they bought steam engines. That really changed the Gassaway in this rural area in the early 1920s and the 1930s. Because of the grist mills, because of the sawmills, they was able to replace unreliable power with reliable power with the steam engines. This is a picture here of Mr. G.G. Melton. He died in 1911, and his family wanted to have him a large tombstone, and this is a tombstone that is up on Beach Hill. When the monument company delivered it, they couldn't get it up on Beach Hill because there was no road for an automobile to get up there. So they hired a local farmer, and he took 2 teams of mules and a hillside slide, and he made 3 trips because it was in 3 different sections, and they drug it up on top of Beach Hill for them to erect as his tombstone. And of course, it is still there today. This is Mr. Lambert Vandergriff and his wife. They also had a mercantile store in Gassaway, and he went into the kind of the trucking business, going to Nashville in the early 1950s, bringing supplies back to Gassaway. This community again was booming area in the 20s and the 30s, and in World War II is when people started moving out, going to factory jobs and changing. Mr. G.G. Melton had a daughter. She married a Grizzle. She named her son after her daddy. Her daddy was George Garrett Melton. She named her son George Garrett Grizzle. This is an article from the Cannon Courier in 1981. Mr. George Grizzle turned 100 years old that year, and they done an article on him. And he talks about his time in Gassaway growing up, his family life with his grandfather, and all the events in Gassaway. Him and his wife was very instrumental in donating for the Clear Fork Methodist Church too as well. This is still some of the original equipment from the Melton's Bank. We took that picture of Mr. Howard and Mr. Jim in 1950 and duplicated it right back. This is the original Burross machine that Mr. Howard is standing at. This is the original change machine that is on the counter, the ad machine, telephone, check perforator as well. Here's some more examples of checks. But what is unique about these, this was in 1918, the check is actually on the Bank of Auburn, but they have marked out Auburn and put Melton's Gassaway, and it went through. So again, it was very common back in this period of time to use checks even from different banks. I have another one in here as well that shows, again, no routing number, no account numbers. In 1974, I opened up an account here. And I guess being a young 14-year-old boy asking Mr. Howard, why do I not have an account number? And he told me, you will not have an account number. You never will have an account number because I know everybody's account and I know their signature. And he did. He knew your business, but nobody else knew your business. All of the stamps and everything here is original to the bank. All of those have been preserved over the years as well. Some other things that we've added to the museum. This is a picture of the Gassaway School. We have in here the contract that Mr. Martin Alexander was given $1,200, paid $1,200 to build the Gassaway School in 1922. This is one of the desks, school desks, from the Gassaway School as well. This is a picture of the county officials when they had the grand opening of the school as well. The original school in Gassaway was built upon Beach Hill, where the cemetery is now, by this gentleman. His name is Luke Lee Melton. He was a cousin to G.G. Melton. He was a very religious man. He built a log structure about in 1851, and he would use the building on Sunday to preach. His wife at that time was probably the most educated person in Gassaway. During the week, she would hold school in the same building. This is a desk, a little table from the maneuvers. During World War II, they sent maneuvers in here because this area was very similar to the geographic settings in Europe. My grandparents had a farm, George and Leela Hancock, and they occupied their farm to do their training with. My grandparents had chickens, raised a lot of chickens, and during that period of time, they would come and get some of their chickens to eat instead of eating their rations. When they left my grandmother this little table for her to use. This is some pictures of individuals that went to World War I. The gentleman here with a hat kind of cocked up sideways, that's my grandfather. He, along with two of his brothers, went to World War I. Him and one brother, Cecil, became cooks in the Army. This brother here, John Earl, never made it to the first battle. He died on a ship off the coast of France. This farmer scale here is from one of the mercantile stores that was here in the community, Mr. Lambert Vandergriff. This stool is from Mr. Martin Alexander, who also had a mercantile store. He was a barber, had a barber shop, and he had a blacksmith. So he done a little bit of blacksmithing. And again, he was also the carpenter that built the Gassaway School and some other houses here in Gassaway over the years. On far here on the north side. The firefighters at that time, there was no water except out of the creek. They had a very difficult time trying to preserve and save the bank building and the post office, the old post office building. Mr. Howard was very reluctant to allow them to come inside the building, but finally he let the sheriff of Cannon County, Mr. Robert Bogle, stand in the front door, and he promised him that he would make sure that nobody took anything out of the bank. This is Mr. Clyde Noakes. Me and him became buddies, and I would go to his house every Sunday. He knew the history of Gassaway. Him and his family lived up in Mill Holler. And as I would go see him, he kept asking me, what are you going to do with the bank building and the post office building? I told him, Mr. Clyde, it's in such bad shape, it's going to take me so long to get it repaired. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Well, one Sunday I was there. He got up and he had hanging on a post in his room there, this guitar. And he says, you need to make it the Gassaway Museum. And here's your first entry to it. This is another gentleman that also went to World War I. His name was Bill Markham. He didn't know how to play the fiddle, but he bought it in France. He brought it back. And another gentleman had a guitar. Another one didn't have an instrument, but he made a banjo out of a hide. And they would go up and down the road persuading people, let us come and entertain you. Well, their entertainment was to take the furniture out of their house and to play music for them and square dance. That was given to me from a great niece later in the end. This is Mr. Clyde Stetson's hat. This is proclamation that the state of Tennessee had made for him, and his sons donated this to the museum over the years after Mr. Clyde's death. This is original George Washington that was here in the bank. Again, another one of the journal entries. This is back in the 1890s, showing again here some banking that was going on as well before the charter actually existed as well.
It's one of the mills, I guess, right here.
This is Henpeck Mill. This is over on Cavender. That's here in Cannon County. And that is the farmstead that's over on the Harrican Road. That house is still standing today as well. And this is one of the caves between here and Liberty where they used extensively during the Civil War getting saltpeter out of. That's a picture of my father. He was first elected as County Road Commissioner in 1964, and he remained in positions doing with the County Road Department until his death in 2017. And that's a picture of my mother. She started the insurance agency in Woodbury Insurance Agency, 1974. And that's the 3 schools that have been closed this past year in Cannon County, the Short Mountain, the East Side, and the Auburntown schools as well. This is a picture here on the last day the bank was opened. These are 2 employees of First National Bank and Miss Ethel Kidwell, the widow of Mr. Howard Kidwell, sitting in the chair in front of this roll-top desk. This is Brent Parsley at that time. He was an employee of First National Bank. One of his first jobs was to come here and to shut down the bank. It took him a little over a year to do it. There was no computer systems in Gassaway, so he had to do everything by hand. This is also Wilda Spry, that was an employee of the bank, First National Bank as well. The bank actually gave this roll-top desk to Wilda Spry. Her and her husband had no children. After I bought the building, Brett helped me run down the great niece, and I was able to buy the roll-top desk and get it back. This sign here is what I was able to save from the front window. This is the original lettering from the Melton's Bank. We've got the receipt where this lettering was purchased when the bank opened as well, in 1925, and placed on here. Again, I've always lived in the Gassaway community, me and my wife both. We were born and raised here. I've always loved history, and over the years, like I said, the bank closed in 1987, and First National Bank bought the charter. And at that period of time, I wanted the bank building then because of history. It was one of the last buildings to remain in Gassaway. But over the years, finally was able to acquire it, and again, setting out mainly to just preserve it, to restore it. Had no idea when I bought it that I would turn it into a museum. But once we got into it and people seen the repairs that was taking place, it generated interest, it generated community pride. And that's what compelled me to go on and to do what we've done so far, and there's still much more that needs to be done. Mercantile store, G.G. Melton, George Garrett Melton. And it is told that that was the first automobile that had come to Gassaway, and all the people come out to see the automobile in Gassaway. But that's where he got his post office permit in 1890, into the store building, put his oldest son James as the postmaster there. And then that mercantile store became the beginning of Melton's Bank in 1903. It's a picture of the Gassaway Undertaking Company. And everything about the hearse that is there, that was stored here in the building, Hal Lambert bought the hearse, and it is now in the basement of Woodbury Funeral Home. Kenny Gilley is the owner of it. But everything about the hearse was made in Gassaway except the glass. The glass, of course, was not. But Hal and Kenny brought it back during our homecoming parade one year, wearing their suits and their top hats and all, and we had them stop in front of the undertaking company that it originated from, and to make the picture of it as well.
So the actual building you still own, and it's
Yes.
here right next to the...
Still have the building in place as well. I've not restored it. I've put a new roof on it, but I've not got into the interior restoring it. Back in that period of time, there was very limited amount of embalming actually done. What they would do is do a little embalming. Mr. Alexander would make his own coffins there in that. He had a display that he would take to the people's houses. Usually they would put the body in the coffin, display it on a table, usually in the living room of the home. And then he would put a display around it where candles and other such things could be there to light up the area. I've still got that display in the undertaking building. Also, like I said, very limited amount of embalming was being done, but the original funnel is still there that transports the liquids to the outside. At that time, it was nothing but a field. This was, and this is, Main Street, Gassaway, Tennessee. The Melton's Bank and Post Office, the Gassaway Undertaking Company. Next door to it, where now the community center and fire hall is, used to be a blacksmith shop, about where the fire hydrant is and where the little Christmas tree is there. On down the street is the Gassaway Church of Christ, the brick building. The road to the left is Hogfoot Road. It's where the hat shop, shoe shop, mattress company was. On down the road, for me at about 3/4 of a mile is where the little home telephone company was, and then about a mile on further is the Clear Fork Methodist Church as well. There's mainly 3 congregations here in this area: the Church of Christ, the Clear Fork Methodist Church, and then Sycamore Baptist Church. Across on Kidwell Lane, you have where the Kidwells lived, Mr. Jim and Mr. Howard, and then the little pink top building is where Martin Alexander had his mercantile store, also had his barber shop, and he done a blacksmithing as well there at that location.